Hello, Culminators. I'm here today with Julia Song, one of the most interesting people on the internet, which therefore means she's one of the most interesting people in the world. Julia and I have been Twitter friends for a very, very long time and have never had a chance, as you've heard me in so many culmination situations tell you before, we've never had a chance to hang out before. This is our big chance. Julia, welcome to ColemanNation.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. That was awesome.
Well, I don't know how.
I agree with you. I agree with
you. You are
100%.
one of the most interesting people. Now, however, explain to listeners and viewers what you're up to now, what your background is. People will have no trouble figuring out that your accent doesn't match up with your zip code. You're coming to us from somewhere down south, right?
Yes, from Texas.
From Texas.
Just kidding.
No.
So, just a quick overview. I was born and raised in South America, about 20 years or so. Then I moved here to the United States 7 years ago. So I am a millennial baby, but I got caught up in all this politics and activism things. So I've been trying to keep my career and my politics away from each other, but it seems like they keep encroaching. So my big hobbies are to write about politics, about political things, themes and things like that, but also political activism. However, and on the side, I went to business school, have an associate's degree in law, and that allows me to have a greater understanding of where things are at when it comes to the big picture, but also my experiences in Brazil, living under socialism. And, you know, at the time, my mother was the attorney for the opposition party. So we suffered a lot of political persecution. There's a lot of that going on here right now at this very moment in Brazil. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit.
Sure.
But for, you know, the about 8 years that I lived there, there was a lot of, you know, poverty, homelessness that was actively provoked by those policies, by the persecution, by the fact that those people did not know how to administer the country, because everywhere we turned to, things were crumbling down. So I see those signs here in the US. I decided to get involved. I was involved there a little bit, but I decided to get involved here as well, because it's important. And I didn't necessarily hope to do that. I hoped that when I left Brazil, I would not have to deal with politics at all. But when I saw all those signs of, you know, those socialist policies, all of those bad things coming to US, I had to say something, because it seemed to me like a lot of people did not know what those things represented. And now we're seeing the results of it.
And you know, a lot of people who have seen communism, socialism in action are much older than you. They tend to be even sometimes older than I am. I mean, my parents, my mother fled communism, but I didn't, she did. People in Cuba, people who, you know, fled Eastern Europe. I know lots of people like that, but there are not that many of them who are as young as you are. So you have the ability to speak to younger people who we have found are much more inclined to listen to other younger people. This is not something new. This is something that has been going on for a long time, that people tend to listen to people who are closer to their age. So are you still very involved in crypto?
Crypto?
Yeah. Wasn't that something that you were tweeting about wildly about 6 months ago?
So that goes to my sort of like business and analytical economic side of, you know, trying to understand the knowledge, but it is sort of like merges in with political freedom. So yeah, I still am very much involved, because I believe that one of the ways that we can break the legs of the system is by having decentralized alternatives to the current systems who are very much rigged. So crypto is one of them.
Yes, and I do want to come back to that because I've had the same ideas. I don't think I'm particularly original, I'm not claiming to be original, but I think it is something that augurs well, that is a source of hope for us. But why don't you, since you offered to do so, and since I am confident very few people watching and listening will have familiarity with the topic, tell us about the political situation in Brazil. I don't think hardly anyone in America is aware that they have any kind of urgent or ideological level political strife there. So what's the story?
So about 16 years ago or so, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little closer to 20 years, the Socialist took power of the main Socialist Party took power of the executive branch. And what they did for the next almost 2 decades was setting themselves up to complete power. And so we have the branches such as the legislative, the Congress, we have the executive, and we have the judiciary. But a lot of those jobs were appointed, a lot of those things, such as what we have here, but to a greater degree. And so they appointed their own people, they elected their own people, they used the funds that they're laundering to elect their own people. Once they had a good system of power, they try to sort of like corral everything and not allow for any type of dissent, of opposition of any kind. So what happened and what's happening now is that even though Bolsonaro won the presidency after, the movement that I led back in Brazil was responsible for helping the impeachment of the socialist president. She did not want to leave at all. She did not want to, lose the power that she had. But we sort of went at it, very strongly. She was forced out. And Bolsonaro was elected after that, but he finds himself very isolated in power, in the executive power. So he
sounds familiar to that's going to sound familiar to Americans.
He's facing a lot of pushback. So a lot of what he does is just basically try to fight the obstructionists. So anybody who stands to try to support him gets put down by the media, gets put down by the system and everything else. So what they're doing right now is that they have established this new law, which is called the fake news law, right? And it's not something that's in the Constitution. It's not something that's an actual crime. It's just something that they're doing, like almost like a congressional hearing or whatever. And what they're doing with it is that they're forcing any journalists who are the opposition to answer to a certain level of inquiries by the judicial power. And that means getting their houses raided. We have probably the biggest journalist the biggest opposition journalist we have in Brazil, Alan dos Santos, had his house raided twice. He has, little kids. His wife had a gun pointed to her head. He fled to the United States seeking political asylum. And I've just found out that another big figure in the movement, a writer and a professor, also after being subpoenaed, after being pursued, fled to the United States. And some of them did not flee to the United States. And what happened to one of them, which was one of the biggest at the time, he was arrested and then he came back home paralyzed. So he claims that he suffered torture while he was in jail. And so it's sort of like a very difficult time to be a journalist in Brazil right now, because the socialists still hold a lot of power. People don't necessarily understand it, but that's because the information doesn't have the opportunity to come out. Like same thing with a lot of these different regimes, they control the information very closely so that people find out about it 30 years later, right? So, when we're going to find out exactly what's going on in Venezuela or in China with the forced labor camps? So people don't necessarily know what's happening in the world, but I think it affects the United States, and how we respond to it. It's the most important thing, because if the US, wants to remain as the safe haven for the First Amendment, and is receiving these journalists and providing them with asylum and providing them with a safe haven, then it will send the right message to the world that we're still a free country somewhat. But if we just send these guys back to where they came from, so they're persecuted by their own countries, then I think it's not fair, and it's gonna tell us basically where we're gonna go with our own media in our own country, and whether the people who are doing that here are going to eventually be persecuted as well. So I think there's a lot of things playing out right now that it's important for people to pay attention to.
So how are these Brazilian politicians and journalists doing in the United States? Have they been granted asylum? Are they getting treated decently by the Biden administration?
They're trying to. From the Brazilian perspective, they have asked for extradition. They have added their names to the Interpol list. So these people are being actively persecuted for things that aren't even crimes. In fact, what they call it in Brazil is a crime of opinion. It's a fake news inquiry, and it's not really any crime that's in the Constitution. There's no law that backs it up. So it's essentially persecution. They're trying, but as you know, these things are processed. They're very complicated. They're very expensive. But at the same time, their bank accounts in Brazil are shut down. Brazil has also asked their social medias and the businesses that they run to be shut down. So Alan, for example, he owns the biggest independent media company in Brazil. All of those Twitter accounts and bank accounts were shut down. His personal Twitter account was shut down. His personal YouTube account was shut down at the request of the Brazilian judiciary. So companies that are based in the US are answering to this request because I don't know necessarily why.
Well, because they probably wouldn't be able to do business in Brazil.
That's true. That's true.
Because I mean, this is something that I pointed out years ago when we started seeing that censorship that was originating in Europe or even in the Middle East was affecting what social media platforms in the US were doing. And it's ironic. It's not ironic because who would ever have dreamt it? The First Amendment prohibits government interference, government censorship. No one ever dreamt that we'd have to worry about censorship by a foreign government, where we have, at least in the United States government, in theory, the people vote to put it into power. Here we have governments and dictatorships in other countries putting, or dictatorial government sectors like the judiciary, in Brazil. Now, isn't Glenn Greenwald in Brazil?
Yes, but he toes the line. He
toes the line on Brazil politics.
Yeah. His husband is a congressman for the Socialist Party, so he is basically very well connected. He doesn't suffer any type of censorship. But you're right about doing business, because a few years ago, I think there were a couple instances when WhatsApp was banned in Brazil countrywide. And I remember having to use Telegram to speak to my mom because WhatsApp didn't provide a certain level of information that the judiciary was asking for. So it's sort of like they have the ability to keep the whole country hostage. We use WhatsApp a lot because texting and communications can be very expensive. So they kept the whole country's communication hostage until the company gave the judiciary the information that it wanted. So it's sort of like the judiciary is having this more than God type of power. And the Supreme Court is coming after these people for spreading fake news or misinformation or whatever you want to call it. So it's the crime of opinion. So it's just a very concerning situation right now.
And there is no check on the power of the judiciary. There's, I guess, in theory, the executive branch is controlled by Bolsonaro, right? The judiciary is the socialists, people who have been appointed over many, many years. What's with the legislature? Is it a parliamentary system, first of all? So that
Go ahead.
or is it a separate branch of the government the way it is in the United States?
It's a separate branch. They have 3 different branches, and the branches have a limited power within their own fields. So Bolsonaro wouldn't be able to do anything if the Supreme Court tells, how it is, and vice versa. So he's kind of isolated, and a lot of people, they refer to him as a dictator.
Who controls the legislature? Still the socialists?
Yes.
Oh, I see. He has basically he only has executive power, but he's got a sort of a deep state problem also, because all the organs of executive power are still controlled by people who were appointed before he came to power.
Yeah, all they do is trying to obstruct him. And a lot of people call him a dictator, but I tell them, if he was a dictator, he would have been able to get a lot more done, because all he does is just to try to fight these people, to try to, push back. But every time they come up with something, he doesn't have the ability to fight them because he doesn't have dictatorial powers. He's trying to stay within his constitutional ability to govern the country. And that's sort of where it's at. If he were in fact a dictator, we would have seen a lot more changes, and we probably wouldn't be seeing, all the situations that we have right now. Not that dictatorship is good, but he's definitely not a dictator at all.
Well, I mean, we said the same thing when Trump was president, and people called him a dictator. If you were a dictator, you wouldn't be saying this on Twitter, because you'd be afraid of what the dictator would do to you.
He wouldn't be banned from Twitter as well.
He certainly wouldn't be banned from Twitter. Do you have any hope for the Brazil situation? Do you think there's any way that things can get better there?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are fighting it. I think the fight against the communists, the socialists, etc., is ongoing. In Brazil, we have it much more in the open. So here we have the party that calls themselves the Democrats. In Brazil, we have several parties, and all the leftist parties have the name socialist to them, or the Workers' Party, which is the only one that does not, but is essentially socialist. So, for example, the husband of Glenn Greenwald, he is a congressman with the Socialist Party of Brazil. It's what it's named. So it's something that it's sort of like there's a lot that they did in terms of trying to keep people dependent of the government, trying to keep the indoctrination, the manipulation, the control of the media happening. So it's going to take time. The reason why I got involved in the US is because it takes so long to get rid of them. It's almost like, I have 4 animals. So whenever we have flea infestations, it takes a long time to get rid of them because, you're getting one pet clean and then the other one gets it. So it's sort of like in cycles, right? We're going through another cycle of trying to get rid of them, and then sort of like slowly but surely, while making sure that we implement a transparent and honest and constitutional system in place. So if we allow these things to happen here in the US, like with what Biden's doing, he's growing the IRS to a size that is bigger than Apple, is bigger than Tesla, is bigger than many private companies. Don't even have that amount of employees, but he's trying to do that. And so after he does it, trying to roll back on all of these different things, after he takes away our ability to be independent on energy, after he implements these different types of things, trying to roll back will be much more difficult and take a long time. So I'm trying to alert people not to go down that road, because it's a slippery slope. And after you take the guns away from people, it's going to be harder to get the government to give them back.
Oh,
So
I would say so. I would think so. You seem to
yeah,
like guns.
a little bit.
You got some on the wall. Those are not decorations.
No, they're not. It's one of the things that I'm very much passionate about is the ability to that the citizens have to, you know, sort of put pressure on the government and say, hey, don't push me around too much. We have power over you. And that's what the Constitution says. And no other country in the world has that. In Brazil, we have, if you look up, I'm talking too much about Brazil, but
I think people are fascinated. But also, if you were talking about Brazilian cooking or Brazilian music, it would be fascinating. But people who listen to this podcast will be interested because they're seeing parallels. There's almost nothing that you've said that doesn't have a very strong parallel in the United States. So,
so let me
keep
make
rolling.
the parallel with the guns. Back in the day, having a gun ownership in Brazil was allowed. A lot of households, they had guns. If you go on websites and you look what countries allow for gun ownership, Brazil is probably going to be there. But nobody has guns in Brazil nowadays. And even though guns are allowed, technically, there's been so many little rules added over the years to prevent gun ownership that at this point, if it's easier for you to win the lottery than for you to be allowed to have a gun, because you'd have to go through so much money and time and processes and laws, etc. You have to prove why you need a gun. You'd have to have all sorts, all sorts of different. So it's all the little laws. So overall, the big law still states that you can own a gun. But as you trickle down to all the little laws, nobody's able to get one.
Right.
So
well, and the Soviet Constitution guaranteed all kinds of rights, but none of them actually existed.
Yeah.
Once you started filtering through the various ministries and the regulations and the reality of life. So
that's
you see that
slippery slope.
So but people are still able, I'm getting the impression that in Brazil, people are still able to talk about political opposition. They're not, even though they're manifesting so much control over opinion, over official opinion. How is it that people are communicating?
They communicate through WhatsApp, they communicate through Telegram, they have all these different lines of channels. But for example, when it comes to independent media, they don't even trust using Signal, which is an encrypted app, because they're being persecuted so much. You have the mainstream media, and sort of they had an arrangement with the government to receive funds from the government. All the big star music, movies, actors, etc. All of them had arrangements with the government to receive money, which was supposed to be allocated for culture. So they have 100% free reign to say whatever it is that they want. But when it comes to independent media and all of that, people are still persecuted. And in cases of, for example, one of the times that I was actually suspended from Twitter.
Wait. If they're getting money from, you're saying that the way the money flows to the media and entertainment sector, they're not actually censored, even though the money's coming from the government.
Yeah, because they say what the government wants them to say, and
okay. So they're not censored because they're just like our media, even though it's not getting money from the government, but it's the favored official media and entertainment, and therefore they play ball with the source of the money. Okay.
Yes, in Brazil we have the Ministry of Culture, which basically funds the right type of culture, so the right type of media, the right type of actor, etc. So it's sort of like the one time that I was actually suspended from Twitter was commenting on Brazilian news, so in Portuguese. So there, the social media is very much trying to censor people there as well as they are here. There is people are trying as hard as they can to not say something that could get them to be censored, but it's sort of like closing, the walls around them as well. And if they do say something, then they're probably going to be, if this fake news, this misinformation, this crime of opinion thing really takes off, then they could be liable for a lot more. So it's basically a First Amendment free speech type of thing that's happening there, that people are trying to be very mindful of. They don't want to step over the line and get in trouble with the government
So do
for
you
saying
think,
the wrong thing.
do you think, is there anything in the blockchain space that people are doing in Brazil to build out alternative networks, alternative ways of communicating and organizing?
Yeah, there are. I think the blockchain is amazing because you can not only decentralize finance, you can decentralize a lot more things like communications and even voting systems, like what we talk here in the US about wanting more election transparency. If you had the election systems happen in the blockchain, it'll be transparent for you and I and everyone else to see sort of like where these votes are coming and going. We wouldn't be finding ballots on the ground 3 months later, right? So it's a more open and transparent system that can be used for a level of different things.
And are you able to explain to listeners what, as a practical matter, what that means? Not to the level of programming, but how blockchain would secure an excellent example that you gave would help secure an election, how that would apply.
So one of the misconceptions that people have is that Bitcoin, and the government has been talking about it. Anytime the government pushes a button way too much, I already know something's up. So they're talking about Bitcoin being the currency that's going to be used for money laundering and different activities. But the fact is, the blockchain is a very transparent place for Bitcoin to transact through. So if I send you money, only you and I and perhaps our banks will know about it. But if I send you a Bitcoin, the whole world can know about it. They're not going to know, certain details like my password, my account, etc. But they're going to know that this wallet sent money to that wallet. So it's very transparent. So if we can do that with a system of this person sent this transaction to this other recipient, we would be able to track it from home. My vote came in, okay. My vote is on the way, okay. My vote arrived, okay. So nothing will happen in between those things that would, cause a concern for fraud. It'll be a direct transaction between your vote and where it ends up. So extremely transparent, extremely fast, extremely quick. But at the same time, the government keeps pushing against all sorts of decentralization initiatives, whether it's media, whether it's financial, whether it's whatever else you have. So it's just at this time, it's probably just a dream.
In Brazil or in the United States or both?
Both.
Both. So you think in other words, you think the government's going to get their arms around the blockchain before it's built out sufficiently because there's a point at which if blockchain you would think would outrace attempts to what's the word I want? Co-opt it, because the nodes will already exist and government won't be able to pull them back. Or am I wrong about that?
They're trying to very hard, but I think what their way to get to you, because they cannot ban Bitcoin, they cannot ban all of these cryptocurrencies, is The same way with, for example, there's a social media called Carbon. Even if they wanted to ban, they cannot ban it because it's on the blockchain. Everything that happens, even the messaging is automatically encrypted. So even if somebody like the government wanted to come and take your information, they wouldn't be able to, because everything that's in the blockchain is extremely protected. So their way to get to you is through the end consumer. So if an exchange wants to operate in the US, they're going to have to give a certain amount of information about who they're getting money from. And then you're getting taxed based on each and every transaction that you make. And so it's sort of like they're trying to go after the person versus the system. Every person that uses the system is getting an additional amount of scrutiny over their actions because they're trying to make us worried to stray away from the standard systems that we're used to. But if we were just a little bit more daring, and if we have just a little bit more patience and motivation to learn, that's sort of why I started pushing it a lot, not just with guns, but also the financial sector. If people are just, they'll take away they will not be mystified by crypto anymore, but they would understand that it's part of the future. If they don't want to be enslaved, they would have to learn how to, just deal with it. A lot of, folks are like, it's too much for me. It's too much technology. Trust me, it's too much for me too, but just deal with it because it's the future. And if you don't want these people to continue having so much power over you, then this is what you're going to have to learn. And this is what you're going to have to do.
What else? What else can we do? What do you think?
I think memes.
Memes, because we know only one side can meme.
Right. I think.
Julia, why do you think that is? You have a great sense of humor. I've always enjoyed it. It's very dry, your sense of humor.
Yes.
So not everybody gets it, but of course, us extremely intelligent people get it. We intelligent people extremely get it.
Right. I made a
the left
comment
doesn't
today.
seem to. Why do you suppose the left is so bad at memeing?
I think that it's the fact that they have this extreme sense of self-superiority, like they want to have this righteousness about their actions and everything to justify all that they do. So if I'm going to pick you up, like what's happening in Australia right now, they're using the military to pick up people and take them to quarantine camps. So if I'm going to justify something so horrific, then I'm going to have a level of righteousness, and that, all the humor happens when you're making fun of yourself, you're making fun of others, the flaws, and you sort of like bond with people through the flaws, through the.
You're saying even when you
mess.
seem to be making fun of someone else, you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable when you use humor.
Yeah, because you're also making fun. You're not just making fun of people to bully them. You're making fun of them. Then you're making fun of yourself. Then you're putting everybody into the same pot. Like in a stand-up comedy, nobody's just going there talking about a certain amount of people all the time and just bashing them. They're making fun of everybody. They're putting everybody in the same position. When you're in a position of righteousness over everybody else, you don't have that. You think of yourself better than others, and whatever isn't necessarily according to what you think is right, nobody should be allowed to do. So they don't have any sense of humor or anything, and we see that. We see a lot of that happening right now with the comedy stand-ups, Saturday Night Live. It's just gone.
It really is. I mean, it really is something to see. This is a favorite topic of mine. What happened to comedy? And I realized I couldn't just keep having comics on as much as I would like to, but it's so obvious that there's the left can't meme, the left can't laugh. And I mean, the idea that someone would laugh at Trevor Noah, there's nothing funny happening. There is nothing funny. In fact, it's really nervous laughter, if anything else. But
So you didn't
That's,
think the vaccine dance was funny when they put a dude in a vaccine suit and people dancing around in vaccine suits? You didn't think that was
well,
hilarious?
I'm particularly hard to amuse, so it might not be a fair test, but I certainly, as you know, as you can see, I amuse myself, and I have many times remarked on your some of your some of your tweets. I always appreciate them very much. Are you optimistic, Julia?
I have to be, right? We have to be. A lot of people talk to me about some of the whenever I try to wake up people and tell them, you know, I'm not able to see the future. I'm not a psychic. I am able to see the past because I lived it. And so I'm telling you what I've seen and how this goes, right? So um, a lot of people think of me as like a doomer, but not necessarily, because if I were a doomer, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I would be hiding in my basement, prepping or whatever. I wouldn't be putting my face out there. I wouldn't be trying to, even like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's starting to mix between my career and my political views and things like that. For example, if somebody asked me to what's my LinkedIn, um, it's sort of like I don't want to be doxxed, right? So I don't have that. So it's all these different things that are so negative to my life, to my my family, all of that, having to going through to a protest under the snow, picking up in the winter, picking up a microphone and going to the governor's mansion and just going to town about the COVID mandates and stuff like that. Um, I wouldn't be doing that if I didn't think that there was hope, that there was an end to this. Now, I don't know what's going to take. I don't know how far we're going to go. But if I can help, sort of like brave the lines, like I mentioned, I'm not crazy about technology, but I saw the necessity to learn about crypto when it comes to getting the government's hands away from us. So I took the time to learn so that I could help people see that it's not a big monster. And so if I can take the time to do all these things, to go out there and to organize and to write articles and to teach people, then I think there is hope, that more people are going to learn about it, more people are going to become independent. And that's what the government fears the most, is that they're independent from them.
Julia, you nailed it. You nailed it, and you're the future. I'm glad to have you on board, and I'm glad we've got you here. Take care of your mother. Don't get her in
Thank
any
you.
trouble.
Would you? Thanks, Ron.
Thank you for joining us today, and looking forward to hearing a lot more from you.
Thanks.